Masters Week 2014 here in Augusta, Georgia. You're watching the Hogan Test. When we think of the name Hogan, we think of practice, determination, hard work, overcoming the odds to build the greatest golf swing ever. So here's the parameters for this test. I've taken Hogan irons from the 1960s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. I'm going to compare using flight scope with a modern cavity back iron. It's going to be a TaylorMade Rocket Blades Tour iron. Just one I picked randomly. It's nothing in particular, but the most up-to-date modern iron that we have available here right now. And we're going to compare using flight scope. So if you're not familiar with flight scope, it's a Doppler radar unit that measures distance and accuracy of every golf ball hit. And what I've done to make this easier to do, because flight scope has to be a certain distance from the golf ball every time to accurately measure the shots, I'm going to set it up here on the mat. That way we can keep the 10-foot distance between the radar unit and every golf ball so we can accurately measure every shot, because on grass I would have to move the radar unit periodically all over the range because of taking divots and keep measuring. And because I'm hitting 15 different sets of irons, it's going to take a lot of time. So that's why we're going to set it up over here underneath the shelter on the mat, where you can accurately keep track of ball location and make sure everything stays exactly the same for every set of clubs. So that's our parameters, and now let's go and let's begin the Hogan test. So what I'm going to do throughout the test, in between every set of clubs that I'm going to hit, I'm going to show you a close-up of the clubs. Then I'm going to show you the shot data from Flight Scope, and then when we get done, I'll show you the summary review, and we'll see, are these better, worse, or just as good as a modern cavity back iron.
Alright, welcome to the summary review page, and what I've done is take some screenshots from Flight Scope, and then I will show you, as I've done here on this first screen, pictures of the different models. I have most of these in picture so you can see close up. So we're going to start with the 1962 power thrust, and we'll go back here to the main summary screen, and we'll see the average. These were all 7 irons. Average carry distance was 145. And we'll go to the next screen. We'll see the deviation here. So there's a look at the 62. Now we'll go here to the 63. It was the improved power thrust. I don't have a photo of that one, so let's go back to the summary screen. See on your bottom left, average carry distance 144. And we'll see the deviation was a little bit larger on this particular iron. And then we'll see the average trajectories here. And we'll go next to the 1964 Power Thrust 3. And there's our trajectories, and here's our summary, bottom left corner, average 146 yards. And now we'll go to the 1966 Percussion Center. They call it the PC5. There's our dispersion. Got some different trajectories with this particular iron. Could be because of the shaft. And then we'll see the average carry distance up to 153 yards. Oops, sorry, that's the 1968. Let's go back here for a second. There we go, 146. Okay. So we snuck ahead there for a second. 68 bounce sole plus 1, 153 average. There's our dispersion, pretty tight there. And there's a picture of the club head. We'll go to the bounce sole 1 plus. There's our dispersion. Average carry 160 yards. And there's a picture of that club head. And there's some trajectory views. 1971 is just the bounce sole. Average carry 154. Don't have a photograph to show you that particular head. There's dispersion and trajectories there. Now, 1972 Apex, the first year of the Apex Club, average 162 carry. Beautiful club head. And there's our dispersion there. Different trajectory views for you. 1973 Apex, average 168. Picture the club head there. There's our dispersion, a little bit left of target, but a very tight group. Then we go to the 1978 Medallion. Very nice looking club. Very tight dispersion there. Trajectory views, let's go back here 1 second. So 168 average for that club. 1979, the Apex 2. That's the black cameo. Average 164. There's a picture of the club head. Dispersion there. Getting to some more consistent trajectories with that club. 1984, the Apex PC. Average 153. Dispersion there for you. Now, very popular with Hogan collectors, the 1988 red line, average 162. Here's our dispersion. Again, very similar trajectories with this iron. One of my favorites, the 1992 Apex Fort Worth Forged, average 169. Beautiful club head. That's the club you saw in the Hogan bag. Dispersion very tight there. Pretty consistent trajectories there. And then this is 98, 99 Apex, average 158. Dispersion not quite as tight, but a very solid club. Trajectories there. And finally, the TaylorMade Rocket Blades Tour, average 163. And there's a view of the club head and our dispersion there. Now let's take a look at the summary screen. This is going to give us the average carry distance in a chart for all the clubs combined. So we'll see the carry numbers on the left-hand side, and some interesting information as we look at the fourth column over club. That's club head speed. We'll see the slowest was around 87, and that was with the IPT. And these older irons were quite a bit heavier, so I think that's part of that factor. And then we'll see the ball speed information on the next column. Again, I think the combination of the weaker lofts, the little bit slower club head speed due to the weight, plus some of the clubs, like I said, were a little bit more harder to hold on to because I didn't want to replace original grips for keeping the original value of the clubs. But we'll see the highest ball speed came from the 99 and the 92 Apexes, and then the next closest 73 Apex, and then we go down to the next was the TaylorMade. So ball speed, as you know, or should know, hopefully know, is a very important factor in distance. So that's some interesting information there. As we go here to the dispersion screen. So this is maybe a little bit harder to see, but let's see if we could zoom in on this a little bit. There we go. So the tightest grouping, Apex Fort Worth, 18 yards. And actually the 73 Apex was 15 yards. Then we go to the Apex Fort Worth, then the Medallion, and then we get some different variations between a couple of the older clubs. And the TaylorMade is somewhere, I would say, in the average. And let's see if we can zoom back out here. So unfortunately some of these colors are very similar, but you can see just a basic overview. So again, for distance and accuracy, we've got the 1973 model Apex giving us the best combination of distance and accuracy by 15 yards in accuracy dispersion versus 27 yards in the TaylorMade. So that's a little information we can take a look at.
The last thing we'll mention about this test in particular, I had to purchase 15 different sets of Hogan clubs from different eras, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Some of these clubs are in their original condition, so they had the original grips, which I was not willing to remove because of the collector's value. So I had to take sandpaper and scrub them and wash them and try to clean them and make them as usable as possible. Some of those clubs were actually a little bit harder to hold on to for that reason. The other thing we need to know is the lofts back in the 60s and 70s were much, much weaker than they are now. In some cases, between 6 and 8 degrees more loft on the club than we have now. So we're going to take that into account as we look at the summary of the distances we gained or did not seem to get as close to with the modern clubs. So that's a factor. The other factor towards the end, about the last 2 sets of clubs, the wind was actually moving into my face some. So the ball was, of course, not penetrating as much as toward the beginning of the test. But that worked out in my advantage because the newer sets were hit towards the end, so it kind of helped even out some of the data. But I think if you'll pay attention and really look at, this is not me trying to prove a point necessarily, it's just to show you that if you have a pretty good swing, you can gain just as much distance and accuracy with a forged muscleback club as you could with a modern cavity back club. And Mr. Hogan made, I think, the greatest golf clubs ever. So thanks for joining me, and I appreciate you watching.